there, history fans, I'm back here with a second video today to compensate for yesterday. And I'm still recording with two cameras. If one turns out to be bad with the volume or the video quality or whatever. So today we have the second video, and it's from AlternateHistoryHub. And the video is called The American Wars Everyone Kind of Forgot About. So, as some of you know, I'm from Europe, living currently in Austria and working in Austria. So I don't know much about like the smaller American wars. I of course know the involvement of the US in the First World War, in the Second World War. I know about the American-Mexican War. I know, like the American Independence War. What else? The American Civil War. Like the big ones. So I'm kind of interested which wars they're going to mention here. And of course the Vietnam War and the Korean War, and like all the, not all, but some of the small proxy wars that were during the Cold War. So I'm interested, if you're a European or an American, please write down in the comments where you're from and if you know about the wars that they're going to mention in the video. And where you learned it. Is it on YouTube, or did you read somewhere about that specific war that they mentioned, and so on. So, as always, the link to the original video and to the channel is going to be in the description below. Go give them a view and a like, and check out their channel if you like their content. Subscribe to them, and yeah, let's just jump into the video. So we all kind of just forgot. So he's probably going to talk about from an American point of view.
It's Memorial Day, which isn't simply just an excuse to have a longer weekend. It's officially the federal holiday to pay respects to those who died in all the wars the United States has fought in. World War II, Vietnam, the Civil War, the Quasi-War, the Cherokee Wars, the Boxer Rebellion.
Yeah, no about that.
When Americans think about the wars their own country has fought in, they often think of just the big ones. World War I, Korean War, Iraq War. But ever since the US was just 13 little states, it's been involved in numerous brief wars, both local and abroad, and a surprising number of them have kinda just been forgotten about. So I want to talk about some of the wars we aren't taught about in history class. Is this alternate history? No. No, it is not. The real video I planned about Canada didn't seem too smart to release on Memorial Day weekend. Call it bad planning. I don't care.
Americans fought pirates.
Intervention in North Africa is a touchy subject for Americans today. It seems like for the last few decades we've done nothing but focus on North Africa and the Middle East. So when was the first time we had a conflict in the region? How about 1801? Yeah, when the US was still a young nation, and Thomas Jefferson was its president, America fought a 4-year-long war against pirates off the coast of North Africa. These were called the Barbary Wars, and yes, there were 2 of them. At the time,
Never heard about it. Never. I'm sorry, I never heard about it.
Muslim piracy was a major issue. The coastline of North Africa was made up of a series of pirate states on what was called the Barbary Coast. They included regions like Morocco, Ottoman-controlled Algiers, and even Tripoli. The main thing that united them was they really liked to raid incoming ships. European and...
Yeah, just a quick note. Yeah, I know that Muslims in North Africa were known for piracy throughout the Mediterranean, especially in the 18th and 19th century. But I didn't know that the US was in any way, shape, or form involved in fighting against them.
Now American ships that would cross into the area would often be attacked, and had a ransom not be paid, its sailors would be sold into slavery. This was actually a crisis at the time. It became a debate whether or not to pay off the pirates or to fight them. Jefferson reasoned that paying off the ransoms only would encourage more piracy. When Jefferson became president, the pirate states tried to force another ransom, but Jefferson didn't comply. In response, Tripoli declared war on the US, and eventually all the Barbary states began raiding American ships. We today debate about how the president can use the military without an official declaration of war. Well, this conversation kinda began here. Congress concluded that Jefferson had the powers as commander-in-chief to stop the pirates, protect Americans, and destroy Barbary vessels. Effectively, this was the 19th century version of intervening against terrorists without a declaration of war. Battles were few in the period of 4 years. It was really just a naval blockade of North African cities with the occasional raid. There was one time the Americans took the city of Derna, raised the stars and stripes over foreign land. After 4 years of this war, Tripoli surrendered and a peace deal was made between the US and the Barbary coast. Piracy remained an issue for decades in the region, leading to another Barbary War in 1815. Once European naval technology became far more advanced than the pirates, Muslim piracy died in the region altogether, leaving behind this strange tale of when Jefferson sent the Navy to fight against North African pirates for 4 years.
That time America invaded Florida. Maybe something against the Indians there, I don't know. Because I know that the first 13 colonies weren't all the way until Florida. They stopped somewhere in Georgia. Georgia was, I think, the most southern state of the first 13 colonies. I wanted to say something about, the definition of a war is kind of difficult, and also today. Like, what is a war? If you drone strike some country, is that war? Or is it just military intervention? If, is it war only if you officially declare war? If a government declares war on another government, is that war? Is if you put on a, economic blockade of a country, that's kind of economic warfare. So the definition of war, I think it's kind of complicated, but let me know what you think about what the real term of war should or could be. Because as he said, in the US Constitution, as far as I know, only the US Congress is allowed to declare war. But we can see here that the President Jefferson, even back then, didn't he didn't get the approval of the Congress to send in the troops. So it wasn't. I don't know. It's complicated.
When Americans learn about the relationship between Americans and the natives, well, they don't really learn about it. We talk about the Pilgrims and natives, then skip over to cowboys and Indians in the West. So really, most Americans only learn about the beginning and the end. We don't teach about the couple centuries of constant, and I do mean constant,
the drive to
conflict.
The West.
The United States spreading across the continent wasn't just people in wagons moving and taking empty land. It often involved American soldiers fighting against a guerrilla-style native resistance.
Yeah.
Florida once used to be Spanish land, and in that Spanish land there was a native population, mostly called the Seminole. They lived there and formed an active military resistance to the United States. After the Seminole massacred nearby American settlers, the United States wanted retribution, and so the military was called in. The problem was, Spain actually hadn't given Florida to the United States yet, but that didn't matter. Andrew Jackson, a general at the time, gathered a force of 3,000 Americans in 1400 Creek to break the Seminole resistance. Yes, this meant that the Americans had to invade Florida. The invasion mostly consisted of village burnings and leaders being hanged. The atrocities were condemned, but it's Jackson. He didn't care. There was a period of peace, Florida became a state, but the Seminole were still a problem to the US. Well, when Jackson became president, they weren't an issue anymore. The US created the Indian Removal Act, which meant all the natives east of the Mississippi had to get out of there. The Seminole understandably didn't like this, and the Americans knew it. And eventually war did come. This war lasted... wait, 6 years? Wow. Yeah, this conflict against natives lasted longer than the US was in World War II. The Americans could do little against a group which knew their land. Seminoles would routinely kill American settlers, and Americans would routinely torch Seminole villages. But still, even after years, the Americans would be stuck in that swamp. Sometimes for so long, they had to resort to eating their horses. To be honest, this war is so interesting it requires its own video. In fact, most native wars in the East do. But to cut it short, eventually after years of whittling down native resistance, the US was able to drive the Seminole to a reservation in South Florida. I feel the war was just so brutal, and in such a regretful time in American history, it's mostly just been swept under the rug, at least in the states that aren't Florida.
About the conflict between Indians and Americans. You see the problem with the term war. Like, the Indians didn't have their own, let's call it, state or government. They had their tribes and so on. So, you know, like, fighting them, and the US constantly fought against different Indian tribes at different times and so on. So, you know, like, the term of war is complicated. And we in Europe, we of course learn about the conflicts, but not that in detail. So I'm actually pretty interested in how the Americans learn about the American conflict, or the conflict between Americans and Indians. Does it vary from state to state? Or do you have like some, let's call it, honorable mentions, like, you know, like big battles with Indians and so on in your textbook that is universal throughout the US? Because we only mention, like, yeah, the US, the Americans fought against the Indians and eventually drove them more to the west and so on, and then they put them in the reservoirs and so on. So I'm really interested what the Americans have to say to this. When we really needed a wall with Mexico. Okay.
History sure is great at perspective. There was a time that Mexico truly was sending their worst, and the border was legitimately so dangerous, the United States had to fight a war to keep the violence out. This was a conflict that raged from 1910 to 1919, simply known as the Border War. In 1910,
just a quick note, so the time of the approximately before the First World War, and also during and after the Second World War, but Mexico back then was in total, you know, like almost civil war-like conflicts throughout the whole country. So he's probably going to talk about that.
Mexico pretty much collapsed and was in complete anarchic chaos.
Over the border.
Not even today's violence could come close to how bad it was. This was called the Mexican Revolution, which is way too complicated to get into right now. Long story short, imagine a far worse Syrian civil war on America's border. It lasted 10 years and 2 million Mexicans died. The war was just complicated and confusing, and the United States hated everybody involved, so they decided to just secure the border and fight anybody who tried to cross in. At some points, revolutionaries would just attack American towns, and battles raged to stop the Mexican rebels from seizing it. Sometimes federal Mexicans tried to attack, and gangs and Germans. Like I said, it was a confusing time. War. In this time period, the United States basically just waited for Mexico to get it together, to stop people from attacking inside, and the Americans invaded Mexican territory at times too. This was a back and forth that continued until the Mexican Revolution ended by 1919. Was that the most interesting conflict? No, but it's a little bit of context when we imagine how bad Mexico is today and how bad border violence could be. History teaches us that it could always be far worse.
So it was actually... So, I didn't get it. Did the US intervene into Mexico? Because as he said, like, Mexicans would go over to the US border, to the US territory, and then also plunder some villages and so on. But did the US only secure its border, or did they also go into Mexico? And of course, we mentioned in previous videos the German involvement in Mexico during the First World War, so I'm not going to repeat that. Korean War to DMZ, Demilitarized Zone. Boogaloo.
For the last few months, everyone has feared that we would fight with North Korea for the first time in 70 years. But that's not true, because we actually fought against North Korea far sooner than that. There was a time in the 1960s that America and South Korea fought against the North. For 3 years. There was just a tiny conflict against the North in the 60s that never escalated into anything bigger. And when I mean tiny, I mean 400 North Koreans died, 300 South Koreans, and 40 Americans. The South tried to infiltrate the North and failed. The North tried to assassinate the South Korean leader. It was just a strange time. The North didn't have nukes, and the South was still a backwater. America was too busy with Vietnam, so after 3 years of not wanting to escalate the fighting, it just stopped. It was soon just called the Korean DMZ conflict, and everybody just forgot that it ever happened. The lesson here is you can always stop a war from escalating if you're already fighting a bigger one. So in conclusion, Jimmy, why did I make this video? I don't really know. It's Memorial Day. It's interesting to remember the less popular wars out there as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone, is from the Korean War until today one of the actually more militarized zones in the world. And I am actually not surprised that some conflicts erupted in the, what did he say, like 60s and so on. So, yeah. But once again, is it a war technically if you just bomb each other? And actually, as far as I know, the South and North Korea actually only signed a peace treaty like a few years ago, 2018 or something like that. So they were technically constantly in war because they didn't sign a peace treaty after the Korean War.
If there is one fight that people have recently began talking about, it's the fight for information privacy. And that's why this video was sponsored by NordVPN. Yeah, that's the best segue I could come up with. Oh well. A VPN is a virtual private network. By accessing a private network with military-grade encryption, you can protect yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting from a European perspective, like what do Americans count as war? And I'm really interested what Americans learn in school. Do you mention some of those stuff that he talked about, or do you only mention, you know, like the big conflicts? Like, as I said, the First World War, Second World War, and so on. Because I'm pretty sure that most Europeans only learn about the big ones. So...
and foreign hackers in Russia and China, now is the smartest time to get a resource that can help you protect yourself and your information. They have thousands of servers from 60 countries that you can access, and with a simple interface, it's easy to set up. Say I want to have a new...
Okay, I hope that you enjoyed it. Once again, leave your corrections, additional information, interesting information that you have in the comment section below. I will appreciate it. Our community is definitely going to appreciate it. If you want to join our history community, just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you get notified when new videos come out. And you can also join our Discord server. The link is going to be in the description below. And until next time, see ya!